The year was 1968. Vietnam was a place of endless war, where the jungle itself felt like an enemy. Soldiers marched through thick forests where the air was hot, wet, and heavy. The ground was soft and muddy, every step sinking into the earth. The trees grew so close together that almost no sunlight reached the forest floor. Shadows clung to every corner, and strange sounds echoed through the night. The war was already hard enough. Every soldier lived in fear of sudden ambushes, hidden traps, and the constant threat of gunfire. But in these jungles, the soldiers would soon discover that the enemy was not only human, something else was out there. Something much older, much darker. At first, it was just little things. Strange noises at night. Soldiers heard growls in the darkness that didn't sound like tigers or monkeys. Heavy footsteps crunching leaves, but no enemy appeared. Some men swore they saw glowing eyes deep in the trees watching them as they moved. The jungle never felt safe. Even when no fighting was happening, soldiers were on edge. Every branch snap felt like a trap. Every rustling leaf made them raise their rifles. But after weeks of patrols, many began to notice the same eerie feeling that something unseen was following them. One young soldier later wrote in his diary that he felt as though the jungle was alive and breathing. He said at night he could hear it whisper. Others laughed at him, but many secretly agreed. Then came the first real sign. During a late-night watch, two soldiers near the edge of their camp saw something move. At first, they thought it was a Viet Cong scout, but when they shined their dim lights toward the trees, they saw a tall figure slip between the trunks. It wasn't human. It was too large, standing much higher than any man, its body shaped like a lizard walking upright. The figure moved quickly and disappeared before they could fire. The next morning, no one wanted to believe their story. Some called it war stress, others said it must have been a tiger, but the soldiers who saw it swore they knew the difference. This wasn't an animal they recognized. Later that week, strange tracks were found near the camp. They were long, clawed footprints pressed deep into the mud, unlike any known creature. Even the local guides couldn't explain them. One of them quietly said a word that the soldiers didn't understand, shaking his head as if in warning. The men tried to ignore it, but the feeling grew stronger each night. The jungle seemed too quiet, as though the birds and insects knew something was hunting. Entire patrols would freeze in place, hearing a low, guttural growl move around them in the dark, circling, waiting. Some soldiers began whispering about a demon. They called it the jungle demon, a creature that lived in the deep forests of Vietnam, feeding on anyone unlucky enough to cross its path. Most laughed off the stories, but inside, fear was building. By the time the war reached its peak in 1968, many units had already spread tales about encounters with this thing. Men spoke of comrades vanishing during patrols without a sound. They said sometimes all that was left behind were torn boots, broken helmets, or blood on the leaves. One veteran described his first weeks in the jungle as hell within hell. He said the war was bad enough, but at least the enemy was human. What terrified him most was that feeling of being watched by something that didn't belong in this world. In the thick jungle, shadows moved like living things. Branches bent as if pushed by invisible hands, and always there was the smell. An awful, rotten odor that sometimes drifted into camp at night, like something dead was nearby. The soldiers were trained for combat. They could face bullets and bombs, but how could they fight something they couldn't see clearly? Something that moved faster than their eyes could track and vanished before they could shoot. It was only the beginning. Soon, the soldiers would learn that the jungle was hiding more than enemies with rifles. It was hiding a predator, a creature older than their war, older than their countries, perhaps older than mankind itself. The Vietnam jungle was not just a battlefield, it was a hunting ground. And the soldiers were not the hunters. They were the prey. The soldiers thought they were just imagining things. War itself played tricks on the mind. Days without sleep, constant stress, and the endless heavy silence of the jungle. It was easy to believe the strange noises and the glowing eyes were nothing more than fear working against them. But then came the first real encounter. It started with a patrol. A small group of soldiers was sent deep into the jungle, away from the main camp. Their orders were simple: scout the area, check for enemy movement, and report back. The men walked in single file, their boots sinking into mud, the buzzing of insects so loud it almost drowned out their own breathing. Everything seemed normal until the jungle went silent. At first, they didn't notice. They were used to the sounds of birds, the croaking of frogs, and the endless drone of crickets. But suddenly, all of it was gone. The forest was completely still, as if the life had been sucked out of it. One soldier raised his fist, signaling the group to stop. That's when they heard it, a low growl, deep and rumbling, coming from somewhere in the darkness ahead. The men aimed their weapons, expecting to see a tiger leap from the bushes. But what stepped into view was no tiger. Through the shadows, a figure emerged. It was tall, far taller than any man. Its body covered in rough, scaly skin. Its arms hung low, ending in long claws that glistened in the faint light. Its head was reptilian, with a mouth full of sharp, uneven teeth, and its eyes, two glowing orbs, yellow and unblinking, stared at the soldiers as though it had already chosen its prey. For a moment, no one moved. The soldiers stood frozen, their minds refusing to accept what they were seeing. Then one of them panicked and opened fire. Bullets tore through the jungle, flashing in the dark. The creature let out a scream, a horrible mix of animal roar and human-like shriek. It was a sound none of the men had ever heard before, a sound that didn't belong in this world. The monster moved fast, too fast. It slipped into the shadows, weaving between trees like smoke, impossible to hit. The men kept firing until their rifles clicked empty. But when the smoke cleared, the thing was gone. Silence returned, heavier than before. The patrol regrouped, shaking and pale. One of them swore he saw the thing dart past only a few feet away, its teeth snapping in the dark. Another said it wasn't just one creature. He thought he saw two glowing sets of eyes moving together before they vanished. They didn't wait to find out. The men rushed back to camp, stumbling through the mud, tripping over roots, desperate to escape the jungle. When they finally reached safety, they tried to explain what had happened. Their commanding officer listened, frowning, then shook his head. He told them they were tired, hallucinating, maybe even sick from jungle fever. To him, there was no such thing as monsters. But the soldiers knew what they had seen. That night, none of them slept. They sat in silence, their rifles clutched in their hands, eyes darting toward the tree line. Every rustle made them jump. Every shadow looked like claws reaching out. And then came the screams. A different squad, camped only a short distance away, was attacked. In the middle of the night, soldiers heard gunfire erupt, followed by cries for help. By the time they reached the site, the ground was torn apart. Trees were clawed, equipment shredded, and one man was gone without a trace. The survivors whispered that something dragged him into the jungle. They said his screams echoed until they suddenly stopped, cut off as though a hand or claws had crushed his throat. Now the stories spread faster than the officers could silence them. The men gave the thing a name, the jungle demon. Some called it a lizard man. Others believed it was an ancient spirit, awakened by the war. The locals had their own stories, saying the demon had haunted the jungle for centuries, feeding on the lost and the unlucky. Whatever it was, the soldiers now knew it was real. They had seen it. They had fired at it, and it had survived. The war with the Viet Cong continued. But for the men who had seen the demon, there was a new, greater fear that at any moment the jungle itself would open its eyes, and the thing with scales and glowing teeth would come for them. The first encounter was only the beginning. The soldiers didn't know it yet, but the demon would return again and again until they realized they were not fighting a normal enemy. They were fighting something beyond explanation, and the jungle belonged to it. The soldiers thought they had seen the worst of it. They had witnessed the tall reptilian figure in the trees, glowing eyes and claws scraping the earth. They had heard it scream, but they convinced themselves, maybe, just maybe, it was gone. Maybe it had moved on. But the jungle had other plans. It was a humid night in 1968. The men were camped deep in enemy territory, their tents set up in a clearing surrounded by thick walls of trees. The firelight flickered weakly, barely keeping away the darkness. Some men sat cleaning their rifles, Others wrote letters home by lantern glow. The jungle around them was unusually quiet, too quiet. Then it began. The sound came first. A sharp crack of branches breaking under enormous weight. The men froze, listening. At first, they thought it was the Viet Cong sneaking up on them. But then came the growl, low, vibrating deep enough to rattle their bones. "Tiger," someone whispered. But everyone knew it wasn't Sit. The growl turned into a screeching roar, half animal, half something far worse. It pierced the night, echoing through the jungle like a call of death. The men grabbed their weapons, eyes wide. The sound wasn't coming from one direction. It seemed to circle the camp. And then the trees moved. Branches swayed, leaves shook violently, and in the shadows between the trunks, glowing yellow eyes appeared. Not one pair, several. Watching, staring, moving closer. Suddenly, chaos erupted. The first soldier screamed as something massive leapt from the trees, crashing into the camp. The fire exploded in sparks as the men scattered. They raised their rifles and opened fire, bullets flying in every direction. But the thing was fast, too fast. It darted between flashes of light, weaving in and out, striking and vanishing before anyone could lock their sights. One soldier fell, his body ripped apart by something with claws sharp as blades. Another was thrown across the camp like a rag doll, his helmet rolling into the mud. The men shouted over the gunfire, their voices panicked. "It's Seps here." Someone managed to throw a flare into the air. The red light burst across the clearing, and for a split second, they saw it clearly this time. The creature stood upright, towering over the men. Its skin glistened like scales, dark and wet. Its jaws opened wide, rows of jagged teeth dripping with saliva. Its eyes burned like coals, glowing brighter in the flare's light. The monster roared again, the sound deafening, shaking the leaves from the trees. The men fired with everything they had, M16 SUF, shotguns, even grenades. But the creature seemed unstoppable. Bullets tore through its body, yet it moved as if nothing touched it. When a grenade exploded near its legs, the demon staggered, but it didn't fall. It only grew angrier. In the madness, one soldier shouted that he saw two of them. Another swore he saw three. Shapes darted at the edge of the clearing just beyond the firelight, glowing eyes slipping in and out of view. The jungle had come alive. The attack lasted only minutes, but for the soldiers it felt like hours. Finally, as quickly as it began, the creatures vanished. They melted back into the forest, their glowing eyes fading into the black. The night fell silent again. What was left behind was horror, tents shredded to ribbons, ammunition scattered across the ground, blood smeared across the dirt, and in the center of the camp, 3 soldiers gone, dragged into the jungle, their bodies never found. The survivors sat trembling, their weapons shaking in their hands. Some cried openly, others sat in shock, staring at the tree line as if expecting the glowing eyes to return. When morning came, the officers dismissed the attack as enemy sabotage. They claimed the Viet Cong had raided the camp, dragging men away and vanishing into the jungle, but the soldiers knew better. They had seen the demon with their own eyes. One survivor wrote years later, "It wasn't Set War that haunted me. It was those eyes in the dark. That roar, that feeling that something not of this earth had marked us. We were soldiers, but that night, we weren't Set fighting men. We were fighting monsters." From that night forward, no one in the company felt safe. They dug their foxholes deeper. They set up extra guards at night. They kept their flares ready, their fingers always on the trigger. But deep inside, they all knew when the sun went down and the jungle grew still, the demon would return. And no amount of bullets could stop it. The attack in the night left the men broken. They had lost friends. They had seen things they couldn't explain. And worst of all, they knew deep down that the nightmare wasn't over. The jungle wasn't finished with them. But the officers didn't want to hear it. Reports were filed that simply said, "Enemy ambush, 3 men missing in action." Nothing more. No mention of glowing eyes. No mention of claws. No mention of the demon that had torn through their camp like a storm. Still, the truth spread like wildfire among the soldiers. Men whispered about it while cleaning their rifles. They muttered about it while smoking in the dark. They wrote about it in their journals, careful never to let the higher-ups see. The name had already stuck, the Jungle Demon. Every new patrol went out with a sense of dread, not just because of the war, but because of the other enemy. The one that didn't wear a uniform and didn't carry a gun, the one that could be anywhere. Watching, waiting. One soldier recalled how his squad refused to camp near certain parts of the forest. They said the air was wrong there. Too heavy, too still. They swore they could smell it. An awful stench, like rotten meat and wet earth, the demon's scent. Another soldier, a young private, told his friends he woke up one night to find something standing just outside his foxhole. He said he didn't move, didn't breathe, just lay frozen as glowing eyes peered down at him from the dark. The next morning, claw marks were found in the dirt only a few feet from where he had slept. Word spread beyond their unit. Other platoons began reporting strange happenings, patrols disappearing without explanation, mutilated animal carcasses scattered across the jungle floor, and giant claw marks carved into the trees. The men compared stories, different units, different nights, but the details were always the same. Glowing eyes, clawed footprints, the smell of rot, and the sound, the guttural roar that chilled their blood. Soon, the whispers reached the locals. Villagers told their own tales, passed down for generations. They said the forest was haunted by a spirit older than mankind, a predator that lived in the shadows, feeding on those who dared enter its territory. Some called it a guardian of the jungle. Others called it a demon cursed to wander forever. But all agreed on one thing: it was real. The soldiers listened, half in disbelief, half in fear. These weren't just ghost stories told to scare children. These were warnings. One villager, an old man with a weathered face, told a translator, "The jungle has eyes. The jungle has teeth. You fight each other, but it is watching you all. It takes those who do not respect it." The soldiers laughed nervously, but the truth was clear. They already believed. Letters sent home began to hint at the terror. "The war is bad," one soldier wrote to his wife, "but it's the nights that haunt me. Sometimes I think the jungle itself wants us dead." Another wrote, "If anything happens to me, it won't be the Viet Cong. Tell people it was something else. Tell them the stories are true." The officers did everything they could to shut the talk down. They threatened punishment for spreading rumors. They insisted it was stress, fever, or tricks of the mind. But the more they denied it, the stronger the belief grew. Because the men knew what they had seen, and no amount of orders could erase those glowing eyes from their memory. By now, the jungle demon had become part of their war. Some soldiers even carved symbols into their helmets, charms to protect them from the creature. Others refused to go on night patrols unless they carried extra flares. A few admitted openly that they feared the demon more than they feared the enemy. And then came the journals. Years later, after the war, when these diaries and letters surfaced, people were shocked by how consistent the stories were. Different men, different units, different times, yet all describing the same thing. The demon was real to them. As real as the mud under their boots, as real as the bullets flying past their heads. It wasn't just an enemy in the trees. It was an enemy in their minds, a shadow that followed them everywhere. And the whispers only grew louder, because the soldiers knew one truth above all. The demon wasn't set finished. It would return. And when it did, no amount of firepower, no amount of bravery would save them from the thing that owned the jungle. The whispers about the jungle demon had spread so far that even the commanders could no longer ignore them. Too many patrols had gone missing. Too many men had returned pale, shaken, and unwilling to speak about what they saw. Something had to be done. The official story, of course, was simple. Enemy ambushes, guerrilla tactics, men lost in the chaos of war. But deep down, even some of the officers felt the chill. They had heard the roars at night. They had seen the fear in the eyes of their soldiers. So one evening, an order came down. A squad was to track the creature. The soldiers didn't want to go, but orders were orders. They gathered their gear, extra ammunition, flares, grenades, and set out into the heart of the jungle. The deeper they went, the stranger everything became. The jungle was too quiet. No birds, no insects, not even the croak of a frog. It was as if life itself had fled. The air felt heavy pressing on their chests, every breath damp and suffocating. Even the leaves seemed to droop lower, hanging like warning signs. Then they found the first sign. A tree stood before them, its bark shredded by deep claw marks. Each slash was long and wide, as if carved by blades longer than a man's hand. The marks cut so deep that sap dripped down like blood. They moved on, their boots sinking in mud. Rifles raised, the smell came next. The stench of rot, thick and nauseating. It clung to their clothes, burned their noses, made their stomachs turn. One man gagged, whispering that it smelled like a grave had been opened. And then they saw the bones. Scattered across the forest floor were piles of them. Some were animal remains, broken and chewed, but others were human. Skulls cracked open, ribs snapped like twigs, uniforms torn to shreds. The men froze, staring in disbelief. "This wasn't set the Viet Cong," one soldier muttered. "No human did this." The tracks led them further into the jungle, into a clearing where the trees grew twisted and black. There they found it, a cave. The entrance gaped wide, dark and silent, its edges smeared with what looked like dried blood. Around it, the earth was littered with bones and torn equipment. The men knew at once this was its lair. They set up in formation, guns raised, flares ready. Their hearts pounded so loud they thought the creature could hear them. For a long moment, nothing happened, just silence. Then came the sound. A deep growl echoed from inside the cave, rolling like thunder. The ground seemed to vibrate beneath their boots. The men tensed, fingers tightening on their triggers. And then it came. The jungle demon burst from the cave with terrifying speed, its massive body crashing into the clearing. It was taller than they remembered, its scales shining in the dim light, its claws dripping with fresh blood. Its glowing eyes locked onto the soldiers, and its mouth opened in a roar that split the air. The men opened fire. Bullets ripped through the clearing, muzzle flashes lighting up the trees. The demon staggered but didn't fall. It lunged forward, knocking one soldier off his feet with a swipe of its claw. Another man screamed as he was dragged into the mud, his rifle torn from his hands. The squad fought back with everything they had. Flares lit up the sky, bathing the scene in blood-red light. Grenades exploded, shaking the earth, filling the air with smoke. But through it all, the creature kept coming, faster, angrier, unstoppable. One soldier shouted that there was more than one. In the smoke, glowing eyes appeared from the trees, circling the clearing. Shapes moved in the shadows, huge reptilian forms slipping just out of sight. The men realized with horror that they hadn't hunted the demon. They had walked straight into its hunting ground. The fight became a desperate retreat. One by one, soldiers fell back, firing blindly into the jungle. The roar of the demons echoed all around them, closing in from every direction. The air was thick with smoke, blood, and the screams of men being torn apart. By the time the survivors stumbled out of the jungle and back toward camp, half their squad was gone. Those who returned were pale, wide-eyed, their clothes torn and stained. They carried no trophies, no proof, only terror. When the officers demanded answers, the soldiers refused to speak. Some just sat in silence, staring at the ground. Others broke down, muttering about glowing eyes, about caves filled with bones, about monsters that no weapon could kill. The official report said they had been ambushed by enemy fighters. But among the men, the truth was clear. They hadn't gone on a hunt. They had been hunted, and the jungle demon had won. The survivors of the failed hunt came back to camp broken. Their faces were pale, their hands shaking, their eyes empty, as if they had left a part of their souls in that jungle cave. Some couldn't even hold their rifles anymore. Others sat alone, muttering under their breath, whispering about glowing eyes in the dark. The officers demanded answers. What happened out there? Where are the others? But the soldiers wouldn't speak. Some refused outright, some tried, only to break down in tears, stammering about monsters with claws and teeth. Others simply shook their heads, their silence louder than words. The commanders weren't interested in monsters. They needed reports, they needed explanations that made sense on paper. And so the story was written. Enemy ambush, heavy firefight. Multiple men missing in action. Nothing more. No glowing eyes. No cave full of bones. No jungle demon. The soldiers protested, but their voices were silenced. Anyone who tried to argue was told the same thing. Keep your mouth shut or face punishment. One survivor later claimed that a colonel pulled him aside and said, "Son, the war is bad enough. You think people back home want to hear about monsters? Keep your story to yourself, or you so regret it." And just like that, the truth was buried. Still, the men talked among themselves. They wrote in journals, scribbling down what they weren't said allowed to say out loud. Some wrote letters home, slipping in small details between words about the war, details about things in the jungle or creatures we couldn't set fight. But officially, nothing happened. Over time, the survivors noticed something even stranger. Reports began to vanish. Notes about the missing soldiers disappeared from files. The cave location wasn't marked on any maps. Even medical records from the wounded men were altered, rewritten to say they were injured by enemy action. It was as if the jungle demon had never existed. One soldier swore that a group of unfamiliar men in plain uniforms visited their camp soon after the failed hunt. They didn't wear any badges, they didn't speak much, they just collected papers, asked quiet questions, and left with boxes of files. Nobody ever saw those records again. When the men asked their officers who those strangers were, the answer was always the same: not your concern. The survivors understood. Someone higher up didn't want the truth out. But the cover-up didn't erase the fear. The soldiers still woke up screaming in the night, haunted by memories of the cave, the smell of rot, the claws ripping through their friends. Some refused to sleep at all, sitting awake with their rifles aimed at the tree line until dawn. And the jungle seemed to mock them. Every night they heard noises in the dark, branches snapping, low growls. Sometimes pairs of glowing eyes would appear just beyond the firelight, watching. When they fired, the eyes vanished, but they always came back. The men knew the demons were still out there, but officially they didn't exist. Years later, when some veterans finally spoke about what happened, their stories matched almost perfectly. Different men, different units, same details: the cave, the smell, the glowing eyes, the roar. But when people asked for proof, official records, photographs, reports, there was nothing. It was all gone. One veteran said, "The Army wanted us to believe it was just the war, that what we saw was stress or fever. But I know what I saw. We all did, and the fact they erased it from the records only proves it was real." The cover-up worked, at least on paper. The world went on believing Vietnam was only a war between men. The jungle demon became nothing more than a rumor, a ghost story told in low voices by soldiers around the campfire. But the truth lived on in the minds of the survivors. They carried it with them for the rest of their lives. The war ended, but the memories of the demon never left. Because you can bury reports, you can hide files, you can silence soldiers, but you cannot erase the sound of claws tearing through the night. You cannot forget glowing eyes watching from the tree line. And you cannot cover up the fear that something inhuman stalked the jungles of Vietnam. The soldiers had fought the war, but the jungle had its own secret war, a war no one would ever admit. And in that war, the jungle demon was still undefeated. The Vietnam War eventually ended. The soldiers went home, carrying scars that never healed. Some had lost friends, some had lost faith. Many carried wounds, both on their bodies and in their minds. But for a certain few, the scars went even deeper into their very souls. Because they had seen something in the jungle, something that wasn't supposed to exist. At first, they tried to forget. They tried to bury the memories the same way the Army had buried the reports. But the past has a way of clawing its way back. The nightmares never stopped. One veteran said he couldn't sleep in silence. He needed a radio playing all night because whenever the house grew too quiet, he swore he could hear the jungle again. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, a low growl moving closer. Another admitted he couldn't walk through wooded areas, even back home, without feeling watched. And then there were the dreams. Almost every survivor described them, glowing yellow eyes, staring at them through the dark. Sometimes in the jungle, sometimes in their own bedrooms, always watching, always waiting. The demon had followed them home. Some tried to tell their families. Wives and children listened to stories of the war, but when the demon came up, the tone changed. It sounds crazy. One daughter recalled her father saying, "But I swear it was real. I wish it wasn't sit." But it was. Over the years, a few veterans began sharing their experiences publicly. Small interviews, quiet testimonies, but their stories were often dismissed as hallucinations, as trauma, as fever dreams brought on by malaria or exhaustion. Still, the details lined up too well. Different men, different places, yet always the same description. Tall, reptilian creature. Glowing eyes. A smell of rot. A roar that could freeze a man in place. It was too consistent to be coincidence. Even local villagers, long after the war, continued to tell the same legends. They spoke of demons in the forest, predators that lived in the caves, spirits that took those who dared wander too far at night. They didn't need convincing. The jungle demon had always been part of their world. For the soldiers, the haunting was not just memory. Some swore the demon still hunted. Veterans living in remote parts of the United States claimed to see glowing eyes in the woods near their homes. Others said they woke to claw marks on their doors, deep scratches that no animal in their area could have made. It was as if the jungle demon was not bound to Vietnam at all, but to the men themselves, following them across oceans, carrying the war into their new lives. The strangest part? There were rumors that soldiers in later conflicts, decades after Vietnam, reported seeing similar creatures in other jungles around the world. Places where thick forests swallowed light, where caves dug deep into the earth. Reports buried, of course. Stories silenced, but the whispers remained. What if the demon wasn't set just in Vietnam? What if it was something older, something worldwide, a predator hiding in the deep wilderness, feeding on those unlucky enough to stumble into its path? The veterans could never prove what they saw. The official files were gone, the records erased. All that was left were their words, their memories, and the fear that never left their eyes when they spoke of it. One old soldier, decades later, said in an interview, "The war took many things from me, but the jungle gave me something worse. It gave me a memory I can escape. Sometimes, at night, I still see those eyes, and I pray that when I close mine for the last time, I once see them waiting for me." The legacy of the jungle demon is not in books or records. It lives in whispers, in the haunted looks of aging veterans, in the stories told around campfires, in the warning of villagers who still refuse to enter certain caves. The Vietnam War ended long ago, but for those who faced the jungle demon, the war never truly stopped. The battle between man and monster continues, not in the jungle, but in their minds, in their memories, in their nightmares. And somewhere, deep in the heart of a jungle where the trees still grow thick and the nights are still dark, the demon waits, watching, waiting. Because legends don't die. They live on, and the jungle demon still hungers.